them that they're not going to use their strong immigration laws to help the United States.
We are safe because we are a city of
A prime example of what a total failure Donald Trump has been on the issue of immigration.
Democrats, stop attacking Donald Trump and go find something positive that you can actually do for the country.
A suspect has been arrested and charged with murder and kidnapping in connection with the death of a University of South Carolina student.
Fallout continues from the Mueller probe.
I completely think that they are willing to lie 100% for anything because they can't fight this president on policy.
But I have, and my conclusion is Trump's clean as a whistle.
Free at last, free at last.
Illusion.
Okay. But Ed, you care about baseball.
I do. I went to the Yankees game disappointed. In the ninth, you almost came.
It's early, we're playing good, but we lost.
It's coming together. It's going to be a slow burn.
But on the NCAA tournament side, if you didn't see how that UVA game ended with a intentionally missed free throw, tipped back, buzzer beater to go into overtime, UVA.
Really? I was sleeping.
Exercising the demons of last year where they lost. They were the first number one seed ever to lose. Now they're in the Final Four. So huge hat tip to all those UVA fans.
And if you needed a translator for that, you can join me, because I do.
That was a quick summary. You're like, there's a tip, there was this.
There's a tip. Virginia Cavaliers in the Final Four.
You know what's funny? I used to be a cheerleader in middle school,
Really?
and I would just know when to cheer, but that was it. That was where it ended.
The crowd roars.
Yeah, I was like, okay, it's time.
You were never a snake charmer, though, right?
No, and I hear there's reptiles
We
on
might
the
be
show
doing that
today,
again. Oh,
so
my
someone's
goodness.
in
We know
trouble.
it's your kryptonite, so we might have a little fun
so
with
that's
that.
why it's going to be basically a
glad you're here.
continuing segment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Meanwhile, the president doubling down on his crackdown on illegal immigration, making it clear yesterday that he is going a full court press on Mexico and is threatening to shut down the southern border later this week.
That's right. He also announced yesterday, and the State Department confirmed that we will be cutting payments, aid payments, to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras over the fact that those countries have been unable to contain the flood of migrants heading through Mexico to our southern border. So yesterday we talked about potentially shutting down the southern border. Or 2 days ago. Excuse me, no, it's yesterday. The weekend is just 2 days. Societies to be better, your economies to be better, because right now there's a huge magnetic pull to our southern border. That's going to be, we'll see if that leads to any changes in policy in those countries.
Yeah, President Trump wasting no time with those tweets coming in strong, saying Mexico must use its very strong immigration laws to stop the many thousands of people trying to get into the USA. Our detention areas are maxed out, and we will take no more illegals. Next step is to close the border. This will also help us with stopping the drug flow from Mexico. So it seems to me that he's standing tall on this issue. He's not backing down. I don't blame him. And I know a lot of folks came out and said, you know what, closing down the border, this is extreme. You know what, when you have one side that's refusing to cooperate with you, and you have put every sort of compromise on the table, and you have been willing to negotiate, and they're not willing to even acknowledge that there's a crisis, I really don't know what recourse he has left.
Yeah, it might take drastic measures. You have even a former top Obama official saying that this is a crisis at the southern border. Democrats have said again and again it's a quote-unquote manufactured crisis. And then you have the Democrats, that's in Congress, then you have the Democrats out on the campaign trail getting ready for 2020, and they're somehow saying it's not a crisis, but there is a problem, and it's all Donald Trump's fault. Watch.
We are safe, not despite the fact that we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers. We are safe because we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers.
I think he wants to keep this issue going. I think he's doing it for political reasons. You can see it with how he just being at his rallies time after time, getting his people chanting about the wall, when security experts that I've talked to say that that's not how you want to spend $8 billion.
I want them to be able to find what they need, a good quality of life in their home country. This is not going to happen if we take the same divisive, narrow-minded, myopic leadership that Trump has offered.
Or go back to what we've been doing for a decade or more, which is waiting for Congress to pass comprehensive immigration reform, which I saw Beto O'Rourke calling for at the end of that long speech, that passion, all of that, the crowd's going crazy. He said, we need comprehensive immigration reform. We've heard that again and again. Congress has done virtually nothing.
Anyone else tired of hearing Democrats conflate legal with illegal immigration? Because what happens is they try to own this debate, and they come out and they say, well, you know, we are a stronger country as a result of immigrants. No one is arguing that point. Donald Trump is not, that is not the point to make when you're talking about stopping human trafficking and drug trafficking at the border, and people who are breaking the law law being incentivized to come over. So that sounds like a great talking point, I know, to go out on the campaign trail. I know Beto is out there talking it up, but practically that's just not what's happening. So separate the two. You want to talk about legal immigration? Let's have that conversation. But don't try to get away with, Donald Trump's anti-immigrant. He's not anti-immigrant. He's talking about lawbreakers who oftentimes, many times, not all times, are criminals who are not being vetted properly, and where there is not proper means by Border Patrol agents and people at the border to take care of this issue. They're just releasing people without vetting them.
Absolutely. They don't try to get away with it. They just do it. It's never illegal immigration. It's immigration, and Trump is anti-immigrant.
Right.
And when you look at the stats, and we talked about on this program a lot, most of these folks seeking asylum are coming to ports of entry and seeking this because they know the wall is, the border is more secure than it's been with the troops down there, and they're building more portions of the wall. Our asylum laws are what are out of date. And so they come there, they claim asylum, automatically now they're released because it's too full. It's a big problem that has a lot of issues with it. But
you have even Jay Johnson, who I alluded to a moment ago, who was the Homeland Security Secretary for Barack Obama, on with our own Neil Cavuto yesterday, saying this is a crisis. He didn't call it manufactured. And so Corey Lewandowski, the president's first campaign manager way back when, is saying if Democrats want to be successful, it can't just be we hate Trump.
What we know is you can't just have a campaign against somebody else. That's what Elizabeth Warren is going to do. Beto O'Rourke, whose real name is Robert Francis O'Rourke, right? All they want to do is bash this president. But what they don't want to do is talk about his record of success, because he's delivered for the American people. The promises he's made is what he's kept. And if you look at every metric, people are better off today than they were 3 years ago when he took office. If you want to beat Donald Trump, come out with a plan that is better than what Donald Trump has done the last 3 years. Stop attacking Donald Trump and go find something positive that you can actually do for the country.
And he's talking about actually pivoting to some issues. But Democrats have a hard time doing that when they're focused on beating up on the president about the wall and talking about the Mueller investigation.
You win by being for something, not by being against someone. So people, you have to propose solutions. You have to be the party that people say, you know what, they're going to make my health care better. They're going to make my tax situation better. They're going to let me have more money in my pocket at the end of the day to put food on the table. So Democrats, you might want to have a plan, because anti-Trump is not a plan.
No, that's a great point. But Russian conspiracy theorist number one, Eric Swalwell, keeps talking about. No, really, I mean,
he's digging in.
He's digging. The more they may try to want to talk about issues, he wants to keep going back to the Mueller report. It's not enough for him. Listen.
If William Barr refuses to release it in full and unredacted, will the Democratic leadership subpoena it? Will Adam Schiff subpoena it?
Yes, the president is outnumbered now in that the voters gave us, a balance of power over these abuses of power. They gave us that subpoena power this past November. So we'll subpoena it, but we're also confident that if we have to go to the courts, that because of the judicial precedent that already exists through the Watergate litigation, that's also on our side too.
He's such a pathetic collusion clinger.
Well, you know what's bad as well is the way MSNBC is framing this. The question is framed falsely that William Barr, why can he release this without any redactions? There is grand jury material in here. Everyone on all sides of this who's being honest knows that there have to be some redactions. I'm not saying it should be redacted 80% so we don't see what the president may or may not, his people may or may not have done wrong, what they were looking at, what they're investigating at. Look at it. Let's get the information. Let's be transparent.
Right.
But there have to be some reasonable redactions. The question's false.
But why are Democrats taking this conversation in that direction? Let's take a look at this poll. Washington Post. Do you accept Mueller's conclusion or not? Among Democrats, 59% no, do not accept the conclusion. 33% yes.
When they held him up as the guy who was going to call the answer.
Right, and then if you look at the same poll, do you accept the conclusion among Republicans? 79% yes, 17% no. So I think that Democrats, look, regardless of what comes out in this full report, you're going to have Democrats standing by this idea now. Oh, there was collusion. Mueller was wrong. He was beloved before. They did the same thing with Comey, remember? They loved him and then they hated him. So I think they feel that the base wants that.
They hated him and then they loved him. They hated him when he went after Hillary.
Love, hate, and then love, I think it went actually.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. What is that called? Confirmation bias?
Yes.
I mean, effectively, Mueller comes out, doesn't say what they want them to say. So 6 in 10 Democrats say, no, still collusion out there. Still enough evidence, but this guy and his millions of dollars and army of lawyers couldn't find it.
Republicans thought it was a witch hunt, and now they say we accept the results. That's funny, too.
Well, it can be a witch hunt where you also accept the results.
Yeah, well, I think, because it took so long.
You can't believe Mueller until he said no collusion.
Both can be true. You can say it's a witch hunt, a poison tree, and also say what they didn't find anything, because it was a poison tree.
The witch hunt more comes from, too, the justification for the investigation to begin with. Where was the justification for this investigation? Then ultimately turned up nothing so far. I mean, we'll see the full report, but that justification is, I think, the key.
Well, it's two different worlds having two different conversations.
So, what do you think? Is Eric Swalwell ever going to accept the results? Friends at FoxNews.com.
Yeah, let us know. All right, we got some headlines for you in the 6 a.m. hour. We start with a heart-wrenching story. Accused of killing an ISIS prisoner in Iraq. President Trump has ordered Eli Gallagher be moved to less restrictive confinement as he prepares for trial after his brother made this plea on Fox and Friends yesterday.
I'm almost in disbelief because it's been a 7-month fight. He has been tragically behind that, bars in that terrible place, and our family has just been fighting tooth and nail.
The trial is expected to start May 28th.
New information I heard from Eddie Gallagher's lawyer last night. He has been released and moved into in less confinement.
Released from one prison.
Released from the brig into a different restrictive status. So good news. And to March Madness, half of
this is comparing the threat of climate change to this.
September 11th, 2001, thousands of Americans died in the largest terrorist attack on U.S. soil.
Well, our next guest worked for President Bush when 9/11 happened, and this morning he has a little message for AOC and her claim.
We got that coming up.
So tell me, girl, what you say? What you say?
On the events of September 11th, 2001, thousands of Americans died in the largest terrorist attack on U.S. soil. And our national response, whether we agree with it or not, our national response was to go to war in one, then eventually two countries. 3,000 Americans died in Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. Where is our response?
Well, there's Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez comparing the impact of climate change, yes, to September 11th and the terror attacks. Our next guest worked for President Bush when 9/11 happened. Joining me now, Republican strategist, former presidential speechwriter, Ned Ryan. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Ed. Good to be with you.
Good to have you. What's your reaction as someone who worked for George W. Bush?
Well, this is absurd and unconscionable to equate the hoax of man-made global warming to one of the greatest terrorist attacks we've ever experienced in this country, Ed. And I'd also add into this, I had a grandfather that was a landing craft commander at D-Day, so I find them equating those massive sacrifices of 9/11 and D-Day with their pet political agenda. That's not a scientific research agenda. It is a political agenda, many times being driven by scientists who are on perpetual government grants, as Patrick Moore, founder of Greenpeace, pointed out. He said, the climate crisis is a fake crisis. And to equate those with those massive sacrifices is unconscionable, and I think we should keep calling these people out for what they're doing. Yeah. The thing that's amazing, Ed, is how shrill they're getting as the Green New Deal is tanking and continuing to lose traction even with the Democratic Party, and I think she'll become even more shrill as we move along.
Interesting point you make, because as you know, the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, brought up the Green New Deal. Yes, he did it without hearings, and was it a political move? Likely, yes, but you couldn't get Democrats to vote for it. They were running for the hills. Doesn't that tell us that while AOC and others are pushing this, big taxes and all the rest to deal with climate change, her own party's not there?
No, they're not there. In fact, again, I would point out to people it was 57-0. Every Democrat either voted against it or voted present. They didn't have the guts to actually stand up and vote for something that they say, AOC says the world's going to end in 12 years, and Democrats are talking about this, many of them presidential candidates, and they don't even have the guts to actually vote for it when they're given the chance. I would point this out, too. Socialists like AOC, everything that they're pushing, whether it's Green New Deal or Medicare for all or free college or universal basic income, this is all socialism. They're pushing this, and they realize that most Americans will not accept socialism unless they are motivated by fear. AOC and her socialist compadres are nothing but fear-mongers because they think that is what will motivate Americans to accept their absurd agenda.
Ned, on the other hand, I've got a minute left. I heard you use the word hoax a couple of times on climate change. Right. And AOC and others would say, whether you like the specifics or not, what they're talking about is a mobilization, getting the country together. Does it make it sense for your party to ignore the idea of mobilization, even if her analogies are wrong, and just deal with climate change instead of calling it a hoax?
Well, I think climate change is real, and I would agree with Patrick Moore that it happens. We go through cycles in our planet's history. For us to mobilize and to basically annihilate, if we were to follow everything in the Paris Accord, we would annihilate our economy and lower the temperature by a couple tenths of a degree. That is absurd. It is not real. I think we're called to be good stewards of our climate. Yep. We're not called to do all of these things that will actually really extremely be damaging to the American people.
Appreciate your insights this morning. Thank you, Ned.
All right. Thanks, Ed.
The president, meanwhile, threatening to shut down the southern border. But he would not be the first president to do it. A little history lesson on the decisions of Presidents Johnson, Nixon, and yes, Bush. That's next. Well, good morning again. Some quick headlines. Plans for a Chick-fil-A pulled from yet another airport as critics accuse them of being anti-LGBTQ. New York Assemblyman Sean Ryan argues the company should not be allowed in at Buffalo Niagara International Airport since that airport is taxpayer funded. It comes, of course, after San Antonio banned the chain from their airport. Chick-fil-A says it does not discriminate against any group. They also make some pretty awesome chicken. And Twitter briefly suspends the account of the pro-life movie Unplanned. On its opening weekend, the social media giant reportedly said it was not intentional, and then they reactivated the account. We'll talk about this with one of the movie's co-directors and writers live next hour. Don't miss it. Jed?
Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, just another small mistake.
Small mistake. This week, President Trump vowing to shut down the southern border if Mexico doesn't do something about the flow of illegal immigration.
We have right now 2 big caravans coming up from Guatemala. Mexico's tough. They can stop them, but they chose not to. Now they're going to stop them. And if they don't stop them, we're closing the border. They'll close it. And we'll keep it closed for a long time. I'm not playing games.
This move, bold as it may be, is not unprecedented. A number of U.S. presidents have closed parts of the southern border in times of national crisis. Joining us now to break down some of the more notable instances, presidential historian Doug Wead. Doug, thank you very much for joining us this morning. You've got the history on this. Break it down. You say it starts with LBJ.
Well, it's been all through our history. We've had wars with Mexico, but yes, under LBJ in modern times, 1963, in 1969, Nixon shut the border down, and the Washington Post praised him for it. 1985, Ronald Reagan, facing a similar problem, shut the border down. He felt Mexico had to be punished, to be brought into line to help with the drug war. They had murdered Kiki Camarena, and then for all purposes, the border was shut down after 9/11 by George W. Bush. It wasn't literally shut down at that time, but almost. It was slowed to a crawl.
Now, Doug, you've been an advisor to 2 American presidents. When you hear President Trump talking about the possibility of shutting down the southern border, does that sound like a good strategy to you, given the situation as it stands right now?
I'll tell you what, in my humble opinion, this president, Donald Trump, is a leader. He is a gutsy guy. It's what has to be done. And it's amazing to me, Bismarck taught that politics is the art of the possible. And most presidents are pretty timid about this sort of thing. Donald Trump, it's the art of the impossible. We've had all this money going to Central America to try to stop the narco traffickers. And in some countries in Central America, the governments have become the narco traffickers, and they're making additional money by flooding our country with immigrants who will send back money to their relatives in their country for hard currency. It's a real problem, and we have to have those countries and Mexico involved. And Trump's looks like he's going to try to pull this off.
Yeah, absolutely. In modern times, we've gone through a lot, and you rattled off LBJ, Nixon, Reagan, W. Bush. Which of those examples do you think is most analogous, the best comparison to what the president's proposing to do in the southern border today?
I think Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan's point was they were covering up the murder of Kiki. The government itself was involved, and Reagan was saying, hey, we're not going to have this. And he got to their pocketbooks, and Mexico cooperated, and it was a bit of a turning point for a while. How can you, it's like sweeping an ocean with a broom to deal with drugs.
So do you have any suggestions as to how to manage the public relations aspect of this? Because we just talked about, you gave numerous examples of how this isn't unprecedented. Of course, this will be painted as Trump doing something that's never been done before, as this is like a catastrophic, anti-immigrant measure. How does he present something like this in a way that the American public realizes that A, it's not unprecedented, and B, it might be the only recourse at this point?
Boy, I tell you, I don't know, because you've got the corporations that sponsor the national media making money off of this. They want cheap labor. They don't want to pay taxes. That's why billionaires supported Hillary Clinton 20-1 in the last presidential election. So it's an uphill battle, but somehow the American people seem to be able to see through some of the hysteria of the national media and understand what Donald Trump is doing. That's the only hope he has, and that Twitter might work a little bit longer.
His ability to project that his perspective without a filter is certainly incredibly important, and an advantage that these previous presidents you mentioned really didn't have.
That's right, Pete.
Yeah, good stuff.
That's right.
Doug Weed, thank you so much for your historical insight.
Thank you, Jedediah.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Pete.
Well, AOC has her own explanation about why she's criticized so much.
They need to find another woman to kind of prop up and become a lightning rod.
But she may want to focus on the voters. Next up, why her constituents are turning their backs on her.
And a veteran's heroic act to save an American flag goes viral. Glory.
That's what these folks do. The men and women, NYPD, police forces all across the country. We don't say thank you enough. And so the award's about them doing that every single day.
Well, that's true, Ed, but I will say, working with you, you are a great friend of law enforcement and police, and so very well deserved.
It was cool because after the show last weekend, they gave me a police escort to get there because I was late because I was here working.
Oh, wow.
And I said, it's cool because the last time I got a free ride in an NYPD cruiser, it wasn't no, I never have before. That was a joke.
Oh, man.
Oh, boy.
But it's cool to get a police escort and not be in trouble.
Well, congratulations to you. That's pretty awesome.
Appreciate it.
We got some headlines for you at 6:30 a.m. An Illinois state trooper and military veteran is killed when a driver going the wrong way slams into his squad car. Trooper Gerald Ellis died at the hospital. He is the second trooper on the force to die in the line of duty in 3 days. Trooper Brooke Jones Story was hit and killed by a semi-truck on Thursday. A Southwest employee honors the mother of a fallen Arizona trooper with this powerful performance. The woman was light from Phoenix to Louisville, where a park bench was being dedicated to her son's memory. Trooper Tyler Edenhofer was shot and killed in the line of duty last summer. Some people in AOC's district tell the New York Post they feel ignored by the New York Congresswoman as she takes on national issues. This, as the Democratic Socialist calls herself, the president's latest target.
He doesn't have another woman, Hillary Clinton or whoever else, to vilify anymore, so they need to find another woman to kind of prop up and become a lightning rod.
Ocasio-Cortez was responding to criticism of her during a recent Trump rally. For this next story, don't panic. Your car alarm is not going off. It's called the Car Alarm Challenge, and it's the latest viral challenge taking over social media. That's pretty amazing, honestly. I can't do that. He's like, I'm trying in the break.
Well, maybe. It's intriguing and annoying at the same time.
You want to try it? Try it.
I gotta really try it.
That was weak, Pete.
That was weak.
You really got to go in. Go big or go home.
You will scare no criminals. 0 criminals scared.
Don't quit your day job,
I can't get high enough. I can't get high enough.
It's painful.
Rick, you should try.
I think he was just shy, Rick. I think he was just shy.
No, he's going to go into the bathroom and belt one out.
We're going to hear it from up here.
Hey, Pete, I know you want my job.
Yes, I do.
All right. Can you spot the cold front?
I can spot. It's big and it's blue.
Okay, that's the cold air behind it.
Well, that thin blue line.
Cold front. That's right there.
Appalachians.
The front
Appalachians.
That's exactly it.
Boom.
Nicely done. Boom. Yeah. Here you go. Still warm a little bit to the east of the back behind that. Temps really cooling down. You can see it on the satellite radar image here. All the rain down across parts of the Texas Gulf, and you see that cutting here across parts of Alabama and towards North Georgia, right across the southern Appalachians right now. That line will continue to pull off towards the east. Not a huge rainmaker at this point, but behind it, you'll also notice the cold returns, and so does the snow. Temperature-wise, we're watching temps that are much cooler today. There you go. About 40 degrees in Chicago. That is going to be much cooler than you were yesterday. Still a little bit warmer, 86 in Orlando, so still very summer-like. Here's your temps for tomorrow. We do see this nice warm-up here across parts of the Central Plains, so spring returns a little bit, even across towards parts of the east by the time we get towards the middle of the week. All right, guys.
Yeah, we want spring to return.
Yeah, warm makes us happy, Rick.
Try it, Rick. Maybe.
Pete, a man of many talents. He can do the weather, but he can't do the...
I can do better than that.
Don't do that again.
I feel like. All right, well, thank you, Rick. Appreciate it. Well, tonight at 8 o'clock on the Fox News channel, Fox Nation takes over Fox News for something called In Depth, where you get a preview of documentaries and other shows on Fox Nation. One of those shows that will be previewed is Battle in the Holy City, a documentary I had a chance to host. Here's a preview clip of what you might see.
The history of Jerusalem, wars, history matter as much today as it did over the millennium. Battle in the Holy City is a story about the undercurrents. On the surface, things may look still, but underground, a silent battle is being waged for control of Jerusalem.
I love Fox Nation is doing incredible work right now. If you haven't checked it out now, look at it. This looks amazing. I'm working on one about Jackie Robinson that's coming out in the middle of April. Yeah. And we've got producers working around the clock. They do fabulous work, and I'm looking forward to seeing that tonight.
It is Netflix for conservatives, so you'll get a quick preview tonight on the Fox News channel at 8 o'clock, and then on April 11th, the entire documentary drops. And as Ed said, Fox Nation gets a chance to dive into stories in a real deep way that you can't.
Yeah, I like the deep dive. I like it because you have more time. You can really, I like it. I've been
I like
enjoying
Pete on the scene, too. Like,
yeah, it is.
He's like reporter man.
Trying to play, Ed journalist man, So we got some stuff that you've never seen.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks. Great.
Well, the man who murdered his wife and 2 daughters says he's now found God in prison. Is this a legitimate argument for Democrats trying to ban the death penalty? Pastor Robert Jeffress, he's here next.
And even the pros mess up every now and again. What was...
Everybody's talking.
Welcome back. A couple of quick sports headlines for you this morning. Tiger Woods comes 4 feet away from a chance at match play victory.
Not this time for Tiger.
Nothing's a gimme. Woods eliminated from the World Golf Championships in Texas after missing that 4-foot putt on the 18th tee. And Bryce Harper goes...
I never knew I could have a relationship with God like I do now. I just wish nobody had to pay any kind of price for this.
So is this a legitimate argument for a ban on the death penalty like some Democrats are calling for out on the campaign trail? Here to react, senior pastor at First Baptist Church, Fox News contributor, Pastor Robert Jeffress. Good morning, Pastor.
Morning.
Good morning. Let's talk about the facts of the case and just your reaction as a pastor before we get into politics.
All right.
But, what are your thoughts then? Can you really find God after killing your pregnant wife and smothering 2 daughters?
Look, the message of Christianity for 2,000 years has been that Christ is willing to forgive any sin for those who ask, including the sin of murder. I mean, the Bible is filled with murderers God forgave. Moses, David, even the Apostle Paul. But even though God's forgiveness erases the eternal consequences of our sin, we don't have to go to hell, it doesn't erase the immediate consequences. And one of those consequences is the death penalty, God said. Since the beginning of civilization, Genesis 9:6, God said, whoever sheds man's blood, by man, his blood shall also be shed. And contrary to what people think, capital punishment is not a violation of the sanctity of life. It is an affirmation of it. God is saying human life is so sacred, whoever takes it has to pay the ultimate price.
Pastor, the big question for me is, how would you ever decide who was telling the truth? I'm sure some people can find God in in prison and change their ways. But if this were to be used as justification for removing the death penalty, how would you decide who was being honest and who was just saying that to get out of the death penalty?
Well, you can't, Jedediah.
Right.
And look, let's admit, the death penalty is sometimes inequitably and even mistakenly applied. We know that, and we ought to do everything we can to prevent that. But I remind people, the greatest example of an innocent person being executed was Jesus Christ himself. He was totally innocent, and yet in spite of that, the New Testament never calls for an end to the death penalty. Instead, Paul said in Romans 13, God has given government the power of the sword, the ability to execute in order to bring punishment against those who do evil.
So what's your message to folks on the left that we mentioned? Kamala Harris, among others, are out on the campaign trail saying quite the opposite. What's your message to them this morning?
Well, I would like to remind them that the Bible says God has instituted government to keep order in our society, and he's given government certain authority to do that, whether it's securing the border or waging war against our enemies who are trying to harm us, or executing capital punishment against murderers. And you know, some people try to be wiser and more compassionate than God is, saying, well, that's not relevant today. Whenever we remove the guardrails that God has put into society to keep order, we're going to experience chaos. God really does know what's best.
Yeah, it's been said by many on the left that this is just an inhumanity, that the death penalty is an inhumanity, and thus they assert that they are actually being superior in a religious sense when they remove the death penalty. So it's interesting that you have a very different opinion about its historical context within the Bible and how that fares.
I never want to say I'm superior to God. God is much more compassionate, and he's much wiser than we are, and he says the death penalty is the way to keep order in society.
All right. Pastor Robert Jeffress, we appreciate you coming in this morning. Have a wonderful Sunday.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, socialism is all the rage on college campuses, but what happens when you ask students to redistribute their own GPAs to other students in need?
Give, like, help them. I would want to say no, straight up.
I don't think that'd be a good idea. So, no, I wouldn't sacrifice my own things.
Oh, look at that. Campus Reform's Cabot Phillips got the word on campus, and he joins us next hour. And a veteran's heroic act to save an American